Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Craftsy Chats. My name is Leah. I am your moderator for today's event. And in just a brief moment, we have Rachael Teufel with us. She's going to be giving us a little bit of her own background. But before that, a couple things from me. So first, Rachael is here to answer your questions. So that's what your chat box is for. You can go ahead and check that out right below the video player if you're watching on the website, or you can use the chat on YouTube or Facebook. And we'll get as many questions to Rachael in the time that we have today as possible. So you can go ahead and drop those in as soon as you have one that pops into your head. You can also just send us a little hello, let us know where you're watching from, and any Easter plans you might have coming up this weekend. I know some of us are celebrating Easter, and that's on everybody's mind. So if you have something fun you'd like to share with the community, you can drop that into the chat box as well. And then, of course, we've got a little freebie for you today. So there's a free download, a recipe that you can grab, and it's one of Rachael's, actually. It's the Easy Carrot Cake recipe, another one that really works out well with Easter around the corner. So if you would like to go ahead and try that out, get your free download by clicking the link in the video description. Now that's all from me. I'm going to send it over to Rachael for just a moment. Rachael, thank you so much for joining us. I'd love for you to start us out by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what brought you here to us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Leah. I'm excited to be here and can't wait to answer some questions from everyone. My name, of course, is Rachael. I am the owner of Intricate Icings Cake Design, which is a luxury cake design studio in Denver. And I have taught with Craftsy in the past, many classes on your platform, and recently took on a role as managing editor for a new cake website, and that is called Creative Cake Design. So I am sort of juggling all sorts of balls in the air right now, but it has been a blast and so much fun to just really dive into our teaching community and interact with all of our students, of course.
Now, you have been busy this week too, Rachael, with things going on, I believe, in the studio. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've most recently been up to?
Yeah, sure. So we decided to actually film in my home here in Colorado in my newly remodeled kitchen, which was just wonderful. And we did 3 different days worth of filming. And my goodness, filming just is such a laborious task, but so much fun as well. We have some really amazing classes coming to the platform soon. We do have a cake all about, or a class all about baking different styles of cake using different methods. So the carrot cake is certainly one of those recipes that are in there, but you're kind of getting a sneak peek and a freebie here today. But we're also doing a luxurious carrot cake as well as a rich chocolate fudge cake. And then we did some filming of an adorable puppy class as well. So everything from a 3D puppy to puppy cupcakes to even some really cute molasses sugar cookie bones that really look like milk bones. If you put those next to an actual dog treat, my goodness, you could not tell the difference. So we've got some really great fun things coming up soon.
Oh, that sounds great. We're going to get to some questions here in a minute, but Rachael, always, if anything pops into your head that you would like to talk about as well, we have about an hour with you, so there's plenty of time to answer questions, share your thoughts, and get things rolling before we head into the weekend. So we have our first question that's come in here from Holly, and it's about the carrot cake, but a little twist on it. So Holly's got a husband that isn't such a fan of carrot cake. So looking for some alternatives for an Easter cake that isn't carrot. What do you have for some suggestions?
You know, there are all sorts of styles of cake that can work for any holiday, truly. And I'm a firm believer that you should never make something for a holiday that you're not going to enjoy. So I love that you're thinking past the fact that carrot cake is a very traditional cake that we serve around Easter time, and thinking of your husband. So kudos to you, first of all. I really think anything light and airy is really the way to go. I know carrot cake tends to be very heavy. It's very rich. It's got a lot of flavors in it. I will say, Holly, I have never been a carrot cake fan. That was not the cake of choice for me ever. I always went with something lighter. I loved vanillas and coconuts and just yellow cake. I mean, anything that just didn't really have a ton of flavor. I was just such a picky eater growing up. And then I tried carrot cake again. And then I sort of altered the recipe that you guys have access to. And it is actually quite delicious. So I'm curious what your husband doesn't like about a carrot cake. So I could maybe even suggest some alterations to this recipe, because I went from hating carrot cake to being an absolute fan of carrot cake and will not pass up a bite when it's made by me. um, because the special ingredient in this particular carrot cake recipe is actually pineapple, which gives it a slightly different twist to your traditional carrot cake, and it gives it more sweetness. And I find that most people who don't care for carrot cake just feel like they're just kind of eating spices. They're not eating anything that has a whole lot of flavor. Like carrots don't have a ton of flavor on their own, but when you add some other ingredients to it, it really can brighten things up. And that's what the pineapple does in this recipe. So I might actually suggest baking up the recipe and maybe not telling him it's carrot cake and then having him try a bite, see what he thinks. But truly anything on the lighter side. I personally love coconut, especially around this time of year, because you can do some really fun things with coconut from a decorating perspective. You know, not just Easter, but spring in general. We think of things like the trees blooming and flowers like tulips starting to bloom. So I love using toasted coconut with just a little bit of green food color added to it. And that gives a beautiful, like grassy feel to a cake. So even doing something like a twist on a vanilla cake that just has a little bit of coconut around the bottom, maybe some cute little fresh flowers tucked in with it. You know, there's lots of options, obviously, but anything that's on the lighter side is going to be just perfect for spring. Maybe even throw a little bit of like a lemon or a lime zest to it just to freshen it up and brighten it a little bit.
All right, that looks like that's probably going to be the way to go, because Holly did add, I think it's the actual carrots that he doesn't like in the cake.
Well, guess
So,
what? You don't have to put the carrots in this carrot cake recipe. I am going to give you another little tip. If you want to change this recipe to avoid carrots altogether, swap it out for zucchini. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, I don't know about that. The zucchini has a very similar texture to carrot. And so you can swap zucchini and carrot out in a lot of different recipes to change up the texture and the flavor profile just a little bit. So I know some people really love all those wonderful spices that come in a carrot cake, right? The nutmeg, the cinnamon, the allspice, those types of flavors, to me, they just are like the perfect combination, especially in the fall. So kind of odd that it's coming up at Easter time, but swap zucchini in there. You won't notice the zucchini flavor because, again, it's another vegetable that's fairly bland in flavor until you add stuff to it. So swap out your carrot, put some zucchini in there. Nobody will know the difference.
oh, wow, you kind of blew my mind there with that one. That's amazing. I'm going to have to try that sometime myself.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to a couple questions we have about frosting. So the first one is from Tammy. Tammy wants to know how long buttercream can be kept in the fridge once it's made.
So it's really going to depend on the type of buttercream that you're making, Tammy. So we have a few different styles. We have a very traditional American style buttercream, and that is really a powdered sugar and butter based recipe. And those two ingredients combined together very easily can stay even on your countertop, surprisingly, for a few days. And then you can put your American style buttercream in the refrigerator for about 2 weeks, and you can actually freeze it as well. I usually recommend limiting all freezer items to about a month, because past a month, you're going to lose your quality pretty quickly. But they certainly will last much longer in the freezer, but the quality starts to go down after about a month. And then, of course, we have other styles of buttercreams like our Swiss meringues and our Italian meringues. Those are a little bit more fragile and delicate, and they're not going to last quite as long. Those do need to go in the refrigerator refrigerator, and you can easily keep those in there for about a week. You will likely need to bring them to room temperature and whip them back up so that they'll aerate and get that nice fluffy texture that we look for in a meringue, but those will easily last a week. You can also freeze those. What I have found with freezing a meringue based icing is that it doesn't typically whip right back up into what we expect it to do. So freezing it is feasible if it's something that's already iced. For instance, I will often just create a couple of sample boxes that have my Swiss meringue buttercream on for clients. And I'll toss those in the freezer for about a week or so, nothing longer than that. But that Swiss meringue comes out of there, comes to room temperature already on the slice, and it's really quite delicious. It's just harder when you're gonna re-whip that one. That one doesn't fluff up quite as well after being in the freezer, so.
All right, and staying on frosting, a little more general. So Molly wants to know, what can you use to make frosting a little less sweet?
Interesting. So again, we're talking about a couple of different styles of buttercream, right? I'm not exactly sure which one Molly is referencing. It's probably the American style buttercream, which is what we are most used to here in the States. And that is the powdered sugar, butter, maybe a little bit of milk or water, and then vanilla or other styles of extracts. But that particular icing is really hard to lessen the sweetness. And the reason for that is because it is a powdered sugar based recipe. So typically when people are asking me for an icing recipe that is a little less sweet, I actually steer them toward a Swiss meringue. And the reason for that is the meringue is actually, it's made from sugar and egg whites. It's cooked. It has this light, airy flavor. And then we throw butter in there at the end to make it super creamy and delicious. And that particular recipe is very light and mild in sweetness compared to that like rich powdered sugar butter-based icing that we're used to here in the States. So it's not real easy to decrease a sweetness inside of an icing just because you have to have that sugar there in order to create the icing in the first place. So that's a really tricky question because as much as I would love to be able to make a less sweet icing, it really is, it is what it is, right? Like we're baking and making things that are sweet intentionally. And so it's really hard to decrease sweetness without just using a totally different recipe altogether.
All right, Molly had a follow on to moving away from specifics in general. Molly just wants to know what got you started in cake decorating. So take us back all the way to the beginning.
Oh my goodness, the beginning. That was 20 something years ago from a diving into cake design. I truly though, I'll say my age. Oh my gosh, I'm almost 45 next month. But I really have been in the kitchen all my life. My grandmother was Hungarian and she didn't speak a whole lot of English because they came over during the Revolutionary War and just never really picked up that language very well. And so my way of communicating with my grandmother was really being in the kitchen with her. So learning her cooking style, just spending time with her there, baking with her, of course. And so that's, I think, where my passion for just being in the kitchen and really getting my hands moving with delicious foods, that's where that came from. And then as I started growing up further, my dad really influenced me with the arts. So when we spent time together, we were doing something like painting or playing with Play-Doh and sculpting. We were always building things. We used our hands all the time. We always had, colored markers or pencils or something in front of us to do that was really creative. And so as I became of age to start to thinking about college, I really thought about going to pastry school, but was really steered more towards the medical field, something that we knew was going to be a stable job and something that I could, really make a great living off of. And so I went away to college and pursued a physical therapy degree and started working after that. And I was miserable. I wasn't creative. While I was using my hands to help people feel better, it just wasn't creative for me at all. So I actually started taking a bunch of craft classes in my free time. So I would leave work and I would go take a class either at the local community college. I did flower arranging, glass blowing, jewelry making, painting, sculpting. I finally took a cake decorating class at the local Michael's store and fell in love. So I took a couple of classes with them. At that time, they had a series of 3 classes, and I took the first 2. And then my instructor said, "Here's your book for the 3rd class. Don't come back. Just do it on your own. You're already better than me, and I don't want you showing me up in class." So, I credit my instructor for giving me the confidence to just go out and start playing, because that's basically what I did after the class. I just started playing. I played with recipes. I played with different decorating techniques. And, gosh, 22 years ago, there weren't things like this online to teach people how to decorate a cake. You had to go to an in-person class. You had to look at books. You had to really research on your own and find these things. And so I'm so grateful to be able to take all that experience that I had in my past, and then just playing and teaching myself how to do this, and now being able to share that with everybody else. Like that's full circle for me. That is just like the coolest thing, to be able to take what I know and then share it with everybody else. So that's the short version of how I came into this industry. But I really just hated my day job and started crafting, and then found something I loved and realized I could actually make a great living from making cakes, and I can be around a little bit more for my family, which has been lovely as well. So.
Well, if you're watching and thinking about jumping into one of these classes, look what could happen.
Absolutely. Everybody has to start somewhere. And like I said, I started with a Michael's class and really just fell in love, and then kept building on my skills. And don't get me wrong, that transition did not happen from taking a Michael's class to quitting my job and starting a business. It took several years of practicing this art and really understanding what it's about, to then slowly going from a full-time employee working as a physical therapist to part-time, to then fully committing myself just to my business. So it is a process. And actually, we have a wonderful live coming up, I believe in June, that is all about kind of what it takes to get a business up and running, and a little bit of history behind myself and Maddie Gartman, she's a wonderful cookie decorator. So the two of us are teaming up together to kind of share our top 10 ways to kind of transition into creating your own business. So if anybody's real interested in that, I recommend you tune in for that one.
Absolutely. Oh, what a great idea. All right, before we get to a couple more questions, I want to say hello to some people that have shared where they're viewing from. So we've got people from all over. Melanie says hello from Toronto. It looks like with the emojis, there might be some sun there today. So hopefully you're getting some sunshine. Patrine is watching us from Alberta. We've got some people sharing this on Facebook with friends. Veronica's in from Hornell, New York. So very excited to have all of you with us. Definitely share this. Definitely tune in. And then finally, we've got Carla. Carla really loves the zucchini cake. So what you were saying about using zucchini, you've got one fan of that already out there. So try it if you haven't already.
It's a fabulous substitution, and it's got lots of moisture to it. So you're going to have just the most delicious cake ever. In fact, I actually have a separate recipe that is my top seller in my business, which is a zucchini lime cake. Can't share that recipe because that one's mine. I'm normally really good about sharing anything and everything, but that zucchini lime recipe is my top seller. I can't share that one. But I will say this. The zucchini really just is there to add moisture to just about any baked good. So if you are ever if you have a recipe, it calls for carrots, applesauce, anything that's really sort of lighter. Sometimes people will substitute applesauce for sour cream, for instance, in a recipe, or oil in a recipe. And the zucchini kind of works just like that carrot and applesauce does. You know, you can kind of swap those ingredients out just about evenly and get a really great product. So I encourage you guys to try to play with zucchini a little bit. I was never a fan of vegetables growing up, for sure. Even now they're a little iffy depending upon what they are, but truly zucchini is a lovely vegetable to throw into a lot of baked goods. I know that a lot of people are probably familiar with just a zucchini bread in general.
Mhm.
There are a lot of styles of zucchini bread out there. And this is a very similar concept in just adding something like that to create moisture in your cake so that you just have a lush, delicious cake. Nothing dry coming with a zucchini in it. So
All right. Well, we're going to move on back to some toppings, not quite the same icing. So, Caitlin's got a question about fondant.
oh, okay.
So, Caitlin specifically wants to know if you have any suggestions for making the perfect pastel colored fondant, making Easter cupcakes this weekend. So, really looking for that pastel color. What do you have for Caitlin?
Yeah. So, Caitlin, I always recommend utilizing a gel color when you're coloring fondant, because the gel color is what is going to allow the consistency of fondant to stay the same. So we don't want to add too much liquid, like a liquid food color. That would just make your fondant super sticky. So steer clear of that and stick with the gel colors. And really just utilizing a little bit of color, just a dab will do you literally to get a pastel. These gel colors are usually very concentrated, so you don't need a lot of it, and that will actually create a really beautiful pastel. One trick that I have for you, though, is I always recommend mixing two colors together whenever possible, because when we take a color like pink straight from the bottle and put it into our fondant, while you might have a beautiful pastel pink, it really screams like pink. This is like straight from the bottle kind of pink. So add maybe just a hint of ivory. And when I say a hint, it's like the tip of a toothpick kind of hint,
Mm.
just to change the tone up a little bit. It'll just create a much softer tone than being that like baby pink that we all think of. It'll take it a little bit more. I don't want to say peach, but it does just kind of tone that a little bit to go a different direction. And so same thing with your green. If you want something that's even though pastel, but a little bit off of that just like straight up green that comes out of the bottle, put either a hint of yellow to make it a little more on the sort of limey color of green, even though it won't be lime, it'll be pastel. Or you can go with just a hint of blue to it to kind of take it a little bit more on that, like, I don't want to say teal either, but heading that direction. Just combining two colors together creates a slightly different tone or shade. And it just makes for a far more beautiful color for any style, whether it be pastel or your more, brighter colors, closer to your primary colors, those deep, rich colors. I rarely use food color straight from the bottle. I am almost always adding at least two colors together just to kind of change it up a little bit. So that's the way that I prefer to do it. I just think it has a much prettier color to it when you're just not using it straight from the bottle. One other suggestion I have for you is a color a little bit of fondant. Even if you just want to do like a yellow, pink, and blue, so those are our primary colors, you could use those and then take a little bit of fondant and mix it into the other one. So that's a great trick too. So if you're just Want to mix 3 pastel primary colors, and then like grab your yellow and put just a little bit of pink in it and rub it together, and then grab your blue and put just a little bit of your yellow fondant and rub it together. That's a really easy way to keep you from having to knead constantly, because adding more and more color requires you to really work your fondant. That gets it warm, and it stretches out, and then the consistency isn't quite where we need it to be in order to cover our cakes. So little trick there. And that's probably what I do more often than not, is just color up some primary colors and start mixing those together.
Okay, Caitlin also added, so in addition to cupcakes, it looks like Caitlin might be interested in trying this carrot cake recipe
Ooh,
and has a question specifically for the topping.
okay.
So her family loves carrot cake, but she's a little unsure about the shredded carrot on the top. So do you have any other suggestions for topping this cake? Also, I will add, will you talk a little bit about that shredded carrot? What does it add to the cake? Why do you love it? Let's talk toppings on that for a bit.
Okay. So the cake picture that is included in that particular recipe, that's not my cake, FYI. And I don't usually recommend putting carrot on top of a carrot cake like that. Like we want the flavors to really be developed when we're topping something. And so a shredded carrot or a slice of carrot that's raw right on top of a cake is not appealing to me either. So I usually don't recommend that. I would either recommend a candied carrot. So just cooking down your carrot with a little bit of honey and bringing out the sweetness in the carrot. You could also just cook the carrot with a little bit of butter and maybe sprinkle it with some cinnamon. That kind of takes a savory item and turns it to a sweet, which is really tasty. So you could do that. My other suggestions for topping carrot cake are to utilize what you might actually have inside the carrot cake. So a lot of the additives or optional items that you can put in are coconut, raisins. Always use golden when you're baking, because the golden just have so much more flavor than a regular raisin or dark raisin. And you also have the option of pecans or walnuts. So toasting off some coconut, toasting off some nuts, and sprinkling those around maybe just the edges, whether that's the top border or the bottom border, that certainly works. And of course, you could always create some beautiful decorations using fondant or modeling chocolate. Some cute little bunnies or some cute little carrots placed strategically on the top of your carrot cake would look lovely as well. So yeah, I'm not a fan of just raw vegetables sitting on top of a delicious cake, but everybody's got their own style, right?
Exactly. Well, those are some great suggestions for anybody that's thinking about zhuzhing up the topping of their cakes as well. We're going to say a couple more hellos before we get to our next questions. So we've got Veronica. Veronica wanted to share, she's making a lemon meringue for Easter. The lemony is seeming like very nice springy flavor to her. So like you had talked about, a little citrus can always make that spring kind of feeling come to life. And we have to say hello to Gail all the way from New Zealand. So
Oh
we
my
were
goodness.
talking about what time of day it is for us. It's a completely different time of day for you, Gail. So thank you so much for joining us and watching here today.
Yeah.
Those are our hellos we're going to get to. And before we do our next question, especially for anybody that joined us after the top of the hour, we've got Rachel here. She's answering all of your questions, cake decorating, but that means go ahead and drop those into the chat box. We'll get to as many as we can. If you haven't found it yet, it will be below your video player if you're watching on the website, or just use the chat on Facebook and YouTube if that's where you're watching. With that said, we're going to jump right back in. Yep, Rachel?
Leah, I was just going to say that lemon meringue pie sounds delicious, and you are after my heart. I love pie. So if anybody ever asks me, what I'm going to have for Easter, it's pie. It's not cake. It's pie. I always choose pie. I work with cake so much that it's not that I don't love it. And I absolutely still have lots of cake in my life that I eat. But if I'm choosing for myself, my own birthday, or if I'm baking for a holiday, it's always pie.
After my own heart as well. A lemon meringue is the way to my heart, I must say. All right, let's go into consistency on this next one. So Kristen is mentioning sometimes has consistency issues with baking. So
Okay.
how can Kristen be sure that the cake is cooked enough with all of the moist ingredients? She has overcooked carrot cakes because of this, and it's kind of become a bit of a disaster. So what do you have to say for Kristen and anybody that struggles with the same thing?
Yeah. Well, Kristen, you are not the only one. Carrot cake is a really challenging cake. You're right, because of all the moisture that is in there. It's difficult to get the center baked without burning your edges. So I actually have a couple of suggestions for you. The first one being use a flour nail in the center of your cake pans. So if you're not familiar with a flour nail, it's literally just a round circle of metal. It has a little metal stick sticking up out of it. Sometimes these are called baking nails as well. So you can find them under either name. But if you just go to your local craft store, there are tons of little flour nails. They're intended to help us while we're creating buttercream flowers, but they actually work really great for putting more heat to the center of your cake. So so take your pan, spray it down, or flour it the way that you like to do that. Then put your flour nail in the middle of it and make sure that has a little bit of either like a baking spray or a shortening butter flour mixture, whatever you're using. Put that in the middle and then pour your batter on. And just having that metal in the center of your cake, doesn't matter if it's carrot cake or any other cake, it drives the heat from your pan up into the middle of the batter. And that's actually what we need to be able to make sure that that center is nice and solid, baked through, but not burning your sides. So that's first tip. That's probably the easiest tip. These little baking nails are like $1 or less out at the store. So it's a really good investment if you don't already have them in your cake toolkit. The second option is, rather than heating from the middle, cooling your outside. And so one of the ways you can do that is by utilizing, they're called cake pan wraps. You can purchase them at the store, but I'm a firm believer that you can always make something on your own. And so here's my tip. Take a handful of paper towels, roll them up so that you have just this nice thin layer that's maybe 2 inches tall or slightly less, because you want to go the height of your pan. So if you're using a taller pan, you need larger paper towel. But take that wet paper towel and fold it up inside of aluminum foil and wrap the foil all the way around your cake pan. Now, what that does is it insulates the pan just a little bit more, which takes longer for the heat to drive through the sides of the pan, which makes it a little bit more for the heat to get the top, the middle of the cake, and the sides more evenly. So those are two super easy ways that you can easily change up the consistency of your cakes and make it a little easier for baking them evenly. Sorry, my little pup is going to join us. I hope that's okay. This is Theo.
Oh, hello, Theo. I bet Theo has some good taste testing that Theo has.
Oh my goodness. Yes. He's very good at taste testing for us.
All right. Well, maybe Theo can take Helena's question next. Helena says that I know that going up in altitude can affect fondant. Does it also affect buttercream? And then also, are there any issues with fondant or buttercream when you're going down in altitude?
Okay, so that's a great question. And for those people who have never traveled at altitude with a cake, they may not understand what's actually happening and what she's asking. So let me just explain that a little bit first, and then I'll tell you how to fix it. So what happens is, even for myself, now I am at altitude in Colorado. We're at just over 5,000 feet where I live. And I often go up to the mountains, which are closer to 8,000 to 10,000 feet. Mm-hmm. When you change altitude, you are changing pressure. And therefore, I'm going to give you a bubble example because this is the easiest way to explain it. At sea level, we have a bubble that is this big. And that bubble is going to start to travel up in the air and gain altitude. It's kind of like a balloon too. Same concept. As you start to travel up in altitude, that bubble actually starts to expand and get bigger. And because of that, the reason that it does that is because the pressure at higher altitude is less. So when we're down at altitude, we have a certain poundage of gravity pushing us and that pressure. And as we go up in altitude and get closer to the atmosphere, that changes. So there's your little science lesson for today. The same thing happens with cake, right? Our cakes and our buttercream have air within them. And so when you are at sea level and you bake it and you move up to altitude, and it really doesn't matter what level you're at to start with. When you're going up in altitude, the air bubbles in your cake and in your buttercream want to expand. And when you are creating something up high and you go low, everything wants to shrink. It's just a change in pressure. But what happens is if the cake is completely sealed off with buttercream, and those bubbles, the air within our cake start to change, the same thing that happens to the bubble happens to the cake. So as we go up, our cake starts to expand. We maybe will get cracks in our buttercream or cracks in our fondant if it's covered in fondant, because that air wants to escape. It wants to release from wherever it is. So the trick that is the easiest thing in the world is simply to put a hole in your cake. So every time I take a cake from one level and I'm changing, so every cake that I make, literally, even when I'm going from my home in Erie down to Denver, I put a hole in the cake because there is a slight change in altitude. But it's just simply taking a skewer and dropping it right through the center of your cake, and that's it. If you have more than one cake that's being stacked, so you have a tiered cake, I'll tell you how I figured this out. So quick story. One of my first wedding cakes here in Colorado was actually up in a place called Estes Park, which is at a higher altitude to us. I had a 3-tier fondant covered wedding cake. I doweled it, stacked it, but did not do anything to the top. The top was just perfectly smooth and beautiful. There was no topper going to be on it. It was just a nice smooth tier. I drove all the way up to the top of the mountain, started to unload my cake, and I opened up the box, and the whole top of the top tier was domed. Like literally there was this big bubble. The fondant had just like completely stretched and created a bubble. And that's how I actually realized what needed to happen is just simply skewering through the top, or even if you go from the back side of your cake and kind of point upwards, just so that you're coming close to the surface. It just needs an escape release. That is it. That is the only thing that you need to do differently when changing altitudes with your cakes. It's super simple, super easy. Don't get me wrong. The first time it happened to me, I completely freaked out. Did not know what the heck was happening. And luckily, started using my history with, all of my science classes and my physics classes and all of those things that I had in school to say, what just happened? What changed? I have no idea why this happened. So super easy fix. And if you are worried about the hole that a skewer will leave, a couple things for you. You can use a metal skewer, which is actually much thinner than a wooden dowel skewer. So that leaves a much tinier hole. And be very specific about where you put this hole. And I put them on every tier now just as a safety precaution, but I usually hide them behind any decor that might be there. So if you're adding a topper, you're going to be putting dowels in there for support anyway. That's your hole. So you don't necessarily have to add another hole. As long as each of your tiers have some sort of puncture through the fondant covering or through the buttercream, we won't have this issue anymore. Super easy fix.
All right. Well, I'm going to actually jump down, though, to another question since you were talking about air bubbles. We have a question about how you can get smooth buttercream so you have no tiny air bubbles.
Yes. Yeah. So that is another one that is a little bit challenging, again, depending upon which buttercream you're making. So American buttercream and Swiss buttercream are a little bit different just in their method of creating them. But we're both, in both of those, we're still going to be whipping them and we're putting air into them. And that's kind of our goal. We want them to fluff up a little bit. We want that, like, if you were to under whip a buttercream, it would not be fluffy. It doesn't have that same texture in your mouth because we're creating all those little air bubbles. One thing to say though is if you are over mixing your buttercream, you are adding far more air into it, which means that when you go to ice your cake and smooth it, all of those air bubbles are being surfaced. You know, you're kind of taking away that really thin layer of buttercream that's locking that air bubble in. So under mixing just a hair, or just paying attention to how much you're mixing is usually the fix to the air bubbles that are just in there. You're probably whipping either too long or too fast. So slow your mixer down a little bit, let that buttercream, all of those ingredients incorporate, but not whip in quite as much air.
Okay, let's move on to, I'm going to call these the fun questions coming in from
Okay.
KJ. So
These are
KJ,
fun.
KJ's got a few. You'll see what I mean. So
Okay.
the first one is KJ's wondering if you have a recipe for a funfetti cake. It's her favorite and does not want to buy it from a box. So do you have a recipe for that or something you can point KJ towards?
You know, any vanilla cake that you have, if you have a recipe already for a vanilla cake, making funfetti is super simple. You're just dropping sprinkles in there. So go to the store, grab your sprinkles. You know, if you want to make your own, you can do that too. That's a little bit more time consuming, but it's really easy to make a funfetti cake. Super, super easy. I do usually recommend a butter-based cake for that particular style of flavor. So there are a lot of different styles of recipes out there. Some include butter, some include oil, like a liquid oil. So the type of fat that you're using in your cake will change up what the texture of your cake and the flavor of your cake will be a little bit. So if you use a butter-based, it's going to have a tighter crumb, and it just, to me, has a little bit more flavor. If you want to try to emulate what a boxed cake tastes like, and then you actually want to go with an oil-based recipe. So it's your choice. I'm going to say this though, there's something to be said about boxed cakes. Now, I know the thought of going to the store and buying a box and just adding oil and water and eggs to it does not sound that appealing. But there are certain things in those boxed cakes that really make our cakes fluffier and lighter and keep the moisture in them. So there's something to be said about just a traditional boxed cake. Now, I grew up, as you know, with a Hungarian grandmother baking from scratch. But I also grew up in a time that Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines was all the rage. And so you'll find probably my generation more than any other generation, we were all about, well, not us in particular, but the time that we grew up in was all about convenience. And so we had TV dinners, we had hamburger helper boxes, where you were just kind of taking something and adding a couple more ingredients to it rather than cooking or baking from scratch. And so if you're serving cake to someone like myself, we actually prefer the box cake. I know this sounds horrible, but if you took a poll of everyone in my generation, you would probably find that more people than not enjoy the box cake. And I know it sounds horrible. I bake from scratch as well, and oftentimes I grab a box of cake because it's just nostalgic for me. You know, it has memories. It has all those like just that kind of cool feeling of, you know, growing up and eating that particular style of cake. So there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, there is absolutely nothing wrong with grabbing a box cake. If you love that funfetti cake out of a box, go get it, bake it up, and enjoy. Like, there is no reason not to, in my opinion. Just my thoughts.
All right, KJ is following up to keep the fun going. KJ wants to know, Rachel, if you have any good cake puns or jokes that you would like to share with us.
Oh, goodness. I don't know. I mean, I know that I am always, oh, sorry about that. Theo took the cord with him when he jumped out. I don't know. When I had my studio, my storefront area, and I had employees, we always had all sorts of jokes and, inside jokes. We named all of our appliances. So all of our mixers had names. We had a little white one called Vanilla Ice. Again, my generation, I grew up with, that soft rap kind of influence. And so we had all sorts of names for all of our equipment and things, which was always fun. I don't know that I actually have like a cake pun. I don't know. That's a tough one. Let me think about it while we answer some more questions. And if I come up with something else, I'll let you know. But I always love all the cake memes that are out there. So,
Mhm.
you know, um, eat cake for breakfast is probably or eat dessert first. Those are the two that like come to mind just off the top of my head. I Speaking of eat dessert first, I have been known to order dessert for my appetizer, my main meal, and my dessert. So, and I have people to back that up. So,
Do it.
yes, I am firmly one of those believers that you should do and enjoy whatever it is that you really love without thinking about any of the stigma that might come with it or worrying about what somebody else might think. Make yourself happy. If eating dessert 3 courses in a row is what's going to make you happy, do it. I have done it. I have my husband and my husband does not, I mean, it's not that he doesn't enjoy dessert. He likes dessert, but he would much rather have another serving of meat and potatoes than have dessert, which is
Mhm.
fine. That's great. But we went to a restaurant once, just the two of us, and there was a menu of like 6 different desserts. And I was like, I turned to the waitress and I said, I don't know how I'm going to pick. Like every one of these sound amazing. And she said, well, guess what? You don't have to pick. And I was like, well, what do you mean? She's like, we have a dessert platter that has small portions of all of them. And I was like, sign me up. This is the best thing ever. I can't believe more restaurants don't do that. But what she didn't tell me was smaller portions. That was not the case. We had this giant platter of 6 desserts, like full on big chunks of chocolate cake, wedding cookies. Oh my God. It was unbelievable. And I did not even, make a dent in this entire platter, but I did try them all. And the rest came home with us. But, I just say live life to the fullest, right? Make yourself happy. Who cares if you put an extra couple of pounds on? Enjoy yourself. That is just my motto in life these days. Life's too short. Have fun, eat cake.
Delicious, delicious, delicious. I like that motto.
Mhm.
All right. Ooh, this is a great question about something that we've been able to see over your shoulder for most of today. Adrian is wondering what technique you use to design the cake that we can see behind you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, oops, going the wrong way. Got a little mirror version here. So this particular cake is one of the cakes that I have designed for Creative Cake Design specifically. So you can absolutely go check out Creative Cake Design and watch a video all about how to make it if you'd like. But it's a fairly simple technique. It's really more about using a cutter that fits well together. So you want to use a geometric shape. Things like squares or triangles or hexagons, we all have flat edges. They all piece together really well. So this is just a matter of covering the cake very symmetrically with the same cutout over and over and over again. So this just happens to be a triangle. And you just start at the bottom, start lining up all your triangles all the way around, and then do your next layer. So this is actually a super easy technique to do. Even the kids can join in and have a lot of fun with this one. It's just like cutting out cookies, except using fondant and then placing them strategically. So it's a really fun cake. I always recommend lots of color and even a little bit of texture. The texture may not come through across this screen, but there's actually texture on a couple of the styles that are here today. So
Ooh, that's very fun. Well, Adrian, thanks for asking that question. That's
yeah.
fantastic. All right, we are getting pretty close. We're not quite at the time where we have to say goodbye, but we're getting close enough that It's my warning. If you've been
Okay.
hanging on to a question, drop it into the chat box now. We are going to get to as many as possible in the time we have left. We do have quite a few already hanging out and waiting, so we're going to get to as many as we can, but this is your last call for questions here. We're going to go to Myrelle's question next. And Myrelle wants to know, how do you make buttercream that stands up to flowers and frosting the cake but is not so sweet? So I know we talked a little bit about the sweetness earlier, but how do you make that buttercream sturdy and stand up to all of those other factors?
Yeah. And so not so sweet, I'm always going to steer you towards meringue buttercream.
Okay.
And there's one thing that I have found in using a Swiss meringue buttercream is, as a lot of people know, if you have tried that, it is lighter, it's fluffier, it's airier. It's a little harder to get that structure because it doesn't firm up well until it's cold. So there's a couple things that I typically suggest. And the first is, within your recipe, put a couple of tablespoons of meringue powder with your egg whites and mix those together first before you cook them with your sugar and all of that. Being able to add a little bit of meringue powder, which is basically dried egg whites, there's a couple of other stabilizers in there. It just adds a little bit more stability to the buttercream itself. So let me just say that a typical meringue buttercream, French meringue buttercream or a Swiss meringue buttercream, you're taking egg whites and sugar and you're cooking them together and then whipping them until they're light and airy, and then adding butter and flavorings. When you add just straight up egg white, they're not quite as stable as using a meringue powder. But I also find that just using straight up meringue powder to create egg whites does not taste very good. And so just adding, like I have a recipe over on Creative Cake Design that you can check out for a Swiss meringue buttercream. It actually has 4 teaspoons of meringue powder and like 8 egg whites, I think. And so it's almost like a 2-to-1 kind of ratio. And for me, that makes beautiful flowers that stand up. They work really well. It makes great smooth buttercream for icing still. Coating our cakes, we want a nice, even consistency, just something that's soft enough to move, but firm enough to stay put. And that's a tricky balance with a lot of the meringue-based recipes. But you can do the same thing with buttercream, like an American-style buttercream. Yes, I know this one is still sweet, but you can always add a little bit of meringue powder to your powdered sugar and then mix that together. And that's going to do the same thing. It's just going to stabilize the butter a little bit so that it doesn't melt, doesn't get too soft. But you can also adjust the consistency of an American buttercream by either limiting how much liquid you're putting in, so milk or water. And the other option is increasing. If you like a sweeter buttercream, increase the amount of powdered sugar and that will stiffen it. So there's always a way. It doesn't always mean it's super easy, or you can find it even out there, information out there to be able to change it. I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of what I do is just playing. And that's what I do with my recipes too. I just sort of keep playing until I get the consistency that I want. And sometimes you have to make a few batches and change it up each time to figure out what you can add or delete in order to make it what you need.
All right, let's go to Kira's question next here. Kira, I have similar issues. I have a very small space in my kitchen. And so Kira's question is really helpful for me. And I'm imagining anybody else that's a little mess avoidant. I know there's a certain element of mess that you make when you're decorating, but when you're using a piping bag, Kira wants to know, what is the best way to assemble it without making a total mess? Trying to really avoid that. So what do you have for Kira and people like me as well?
Yeah. So I have a dedicated measuring cup that I actually use for filling my bags. And so it depends on the size bag you're using. If you're using just a standard 12-inch bag, just take a drinking glass, Put the bag down inside of the drinking glass, point down, and then fold over your edges over the glass. And then you can scoop your buttercream in much easier. You have two hands free at that point. You can get it deep down into the bag so that it's not at the top. And then when you fold up your bag to close it, the bag at the top is not oozing with buttercream anymore. So, when the traditional way for people to fill a bag is to put the bag in their hand and fold it over their hand, right? And that works. You just now only have one hand to scoop buttercream and try to get it in, which is challenging for anyone. So just use a drinking glass. I typically am using much larger bags, so like a 20-inch pastry bag. And so I have this giant 4-quart plastic measuring cup. It's got a crack in the bottom. I can't use it as a measuring cup, but I have held on to it because it's the perfect size for my 20-inch pastry bag to just fold over the edges. So highly recommend that. And always tie off the end of your bag, twist it. And if you have a little rubber band or a twist tie or something, tie it off, because that way it'll kind of prevent that icing from coming out the back end too.
Ooh, what a great tip. I really love that one. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Oh, Kyla is in the comments. She says to brag on you a little bit, Rachel. So anybody viewing may not know, Rachel made the original Geode cake, and what a beauty it was. So I was hoping with the time that we have left, if you could talk a little bit about that Geode cake, especially for people that might not know what that is.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't seen a geode cake, you might be living under a rock. That's a little pun.
Ooh, nice.
Just teasing. A geode is basically a rock that is formed in nature due to pressure and certain minerals dripping into a cavern, basically. And they're absolutely beautiful. They're gorgeous. And it just so happens that rock candy looks very similar to the crystals that are formed in nature. And I had a very dear friend of me was opening her business and asked me to create a cake for her. And she said she was using jewel tones and geodes and all sorts. And I'm like, well, what in the world am I going to design, that works with that? And so I literally took the concept of what that open geode looks like, where you see all those crystals, and basically put it into the side of the cake. And I think what was most interesting about that particular design is that it looks like the real thing. Most people literally at the party thought I had taken an actual geode and stuck it into the cake, which is just crazy. To think about putting something natural like that, that's dirty, inside of a cake. I'm just like, really? That was your first thought. But it's one of those things that it looks so lifelike and just really emulates all that sparkling that happens in a real geode. That it took the world by storm. And within just a couple of days of posting that, I had millions of views, several more likes on the Facebook and the Instagram pages and all of that. And it has just been such an honor to be able to share a creation like that, really truly, with the whole world. You don't imagine something that you're going to create is going to go viral like that. You hope, and I think a lot of people hope for that to happen for them. You never quite know what it is that's going to make it go viral and how to present it, but it's really been such an amazing experience. And I do have a class on Craftsy as well as creative cake design, with step-by-step instructions on how to create your own geode cake. I always recommend people put your own twist on it, change up the color, change up the shape, maybe change up which tiers you're using, be creative. That's the fun part about cake decorating. Yes, it's fun to decorate, but I guess for me, the most fun that I have is when I'm designing them and when I'm thinking about what can I use, what inspiration do I have to pull from, just to create maybe something that nobody's ever seen before, like a geode cake. So yeah, it's been so much fun to have that experience, and definitely humbling and honored to be able to have a cake go viral. So yeah.
It's exciting to have all of that kind of come together like that. So Ooh, I'm glad we got to finish on that little story. Before I let us go with some few reminders, Rachel, I want to give you the floor for any other final thoughts that you have, anything you want to leave us with. And of course, please let us know where to find you so that we can keep following you and all of the fun decorating that you're doing.
Yeah, well, you can certainly find me on Instagram, Facebook. I recently hopped on the TikTok bandwagon for creative cake design. So pop over there. I'm still learning though, so don't judge me yet. There's actually a lot of recipes on the TikTok, a lot of fun ways to kind of change up decorating just a little bit. So I encourage you to check out TikTok. I would say just in general for me, kind of tying into what I said with the geode cake. Cake design is really all about having fun. Life is about having fun, but you should do and create anything and everything that you want to do. Do not let anybody hold you back from what you want. Go for it. Keep at it. I promise it will come. It just takes a little bit of determination and some practice, and you'll get there. I heard a quote the other day that really has spoken to me. It may make me cry. Sorry, guys. It is that a gentleman said, you hear the phrase practice makes perfect. And he fully disagreed with that. And he said, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes better. And the more you practice, the better you get. So keep practicing, keep learning, and keep just striving for whatever it is that you want in life.
Ooh, we're going to be sent on our way with a little bit of emotion and inspiration. This really, Rachel, this was fantastic today. You've answered a lot of fantastic questions and given a lot of really good tips. We have some thank yous in the chat from people that are appreciating your help already. So that leaves me to just say thank you to everybody out there for watching. Thank you to Rachel for all of your expertise. Craftsy Chats comes by about once a month, so definitely come join us for the next one. Take a little bit of love, take a little inspiration with you today. And on behalf of our entire team, thank you for joining us. We will see you for the next Craftsy Chats. Take care.
Thanks so much.